Okay, I'm going to pick up where I left off. This is the Old Testament introduction. Is commonly treated under two heads, one general introduction and two special introduction. And with this arrangement, general introduction considers the Old Testament as a whole and has to do with the setting apart of the books into the collection. Okay, and right here it says, one, formerly it was customary to discuss a much greater variety of subjects under the head of introduction, such as the language of the Old Testament, hermeneutics, history, geography, archaeology, etc. There is, however, at present time quite general agreement on limiting the study to the subjects enumerated above and to the collection called the Old Testament. Now, in other words, with the extent, origin, and growth of the Old Testament canon, with the writing and transmission of the books in this canon, the history of Hebrew MSS, recensions, translations, revisions, etc. In other words, with the condition and transmission of the Old Testament text, special introduction deals with the separate books of which the Old Testament consists and discusses their authenticity, integrity, authorship, contents, design, plan, form, style, and date. Well, date and other questions relating to their origin. The division into general introduction and special introduction, though convenient, is open to criticism because neither canonicity nor the condition of the text can be adequately discussed set apart from a study of the separate books. Setting aside, then, the above division, the subjects commonly included in the introduction may be arranged under three heads: study of the origin, original form, general contents, and intended value of the separate Old Testament books. Study of the setting apart of these books into the collection known as the Old Testament canon, and study of the text of the Old Testament and its fortunes from the time of the autographs to the present. To these three subjects may be added a consideration of the significance of the Old Testament in the light of modern knowledge during the past century or two. The Old Testament has been subjected to tests of various kinds. What are the results of these investigations? What is their bearing on the place and significance of the Old Testament in the thought and life of today? Or to put it another way, what should be the attitude of the thinking man today toward the Old Testament? Many demand an answer to these questions before they will undertake a study of the book. It seems proper, therefore, to consider as a part of introduction the results of scientific investigation, critical inquiry, archaeological research, and the comparative study of religions and their relation to the Old Testament and their bearing upon the trustworthiness, uniqueness, and permanent value of the Old Testament writings. History of Old Testament introduction. Biblical introduction is a comparatively recent development. True, some of the early church fathers discussed questions, linguistic, geographical, historical, etc., which are properly a part of introduction, but no complete treatise was produced. In the 5th century, the Syrian monk Adrian wrote an introduction to the divine scriptures, and in the following century, similar books appeared, but none of these, though containing valuable introductory material, can be called introductions into the modern sense. Such treatises were practically unknown before the period of Reformation. The Renaissance and the Reformation gave an impetus to biblical studies of every kind. The revival of interest in humanistic studies created a new interest in the Hebrew language, and the controversy regarding the seat of authority, the church or the Bible, as interpreted by the individual, turned the attention of the scholars towards the contents and their meaning. This led to a discussion of various questions of introduction, such as condition and transmission of the Hebrew text, and the canonicity of the biblical books, and the extra canonicity of the apocryphal books, the authorship, date, and relative value of individual books. And right here it says Origen, Augustine, Jerome, etc. And right here it says J. Ruchlin, 1455-1522, was the first Hebrew grammarian among Christians. He was strongly influenced by the greatest Jewish scholar of the age, Elias, and that's Lev.ta, 1469-1549. Now, the Renaissance and Reformation, therefore, may be credited with giving rise to the modern scientific discussions of questions of introduction. Now, the following are among the most prominent writers of this period: Sixtus of Siena, a Roman Catholic convert from Judaism, who distinguished between proto-canonical and Deuteronomical writings and discussed also matters relating to individual books. An important work was produced by Karlstadt, the friend and co-worker of Luther, Rivetus Divine Scripture, as that which proceeds from God as the special author. He held an entirely mechanical view of inspiration. One of the most influential writers was Ludovicus Capellus, who maintained that the Hebrew vowel points and accents were unknown to the biblical writers, and that they were introduced centuries after the opening of the Christian era. Capellus influenced John Morinus, a convert from Protestantism to Catholicism, who wrote several volumes on subjects of introduction. In his zeal for the authority of the church, he declared that God caused the Hebrew scriptures to be written without vowel points, so that men would submit to the judgment of the church instead of following their own private judgment. Richard Simon, a man of great learning, published in 1678 his Historique critique du Fuchs Testament, in which, among other things, he denied the Mosaic authorship of the Pentateuch. A new epoch was introduced in the 18th century by the rise of rationalism, with its disregard of the miraculous. The way had been prepared for this by B. Spinoza, a pronounced pantheist who believed the scriptures to contain no divine revelation. Born 1520, his book was entitled Bibliotheca Sancta, entitled De Canonis Scriptures, 1520, born 1572, 1585 to 1658, born 1591, 1638, 1712, and then again 1632 to 1677. Now, the accounts of the miracles he considered legendary, and he was ready to reject as untrue all that seemed supernatural. He denied the Mosaic authorship of the Pentateuch and expressed the opinion that it, like the other historical books, received its final form under Ezra. The historical portions of Daniel he considered to have been written later than Daniel on the basis of Chaldean annals. Under the influence of this new tendency, the Old Testament came to be studied like any other literary production, and scholars like Ichhorn, Michaelis, DeWitt, and others went at their task with the definite purpose of explaining the several books entirely in the light of the historical situation therein presupposed. On the whole, the introductions of the latter part of the 18th and the early part of the 19th century were the outgrowth of this new point of view, and may be expected they set aside the traditional views in many instances. Now, the more The more important works of this period are J.G. Eichhorn, Ennealeding in Die Goethlichen Schriften des Alten Bundes, 1787. G.L. Barr, Entwurf in Inleiten in Die Schriften des Alten Testament, 1784. W.M.L. DeWitt, the Buch der Historie Christian England in Die Kanoschen und Apokalyptischen Bücher des Alten Testaments, 1817. C.H. Horn, Introduction to the Critical Study and Knowledge of the Holy Scriptures, 1818. Heinrich Ewell, 1803 to 1875, published no formal introduction, but in his numerous works he covered practically the whole range of introduction. Frederick Bleek, in Das Alte Testament, 1860. Now, in the nature of the case, these introductions, which seem to minimize the supernatural, aroused bitter opposition, and several attempts were made to rehabilitate the older traditional views, notably by Hachtenberg, Vernick, Keel, and in America, W.H. Green. Now, E.W. Hachtenberg. Now, I'm not going to read all this right here. Y'all see it? Get a good look. I'm going to bring it up. Okay. Meanwhile, scholars were at work studying the subject of introduction, especially as it related to the origin of the Pentateuch upon a broader basis. Earlier writers had depended almost exclusively upon linguistic criteria, but scholars like Ruth, Graf, Kunin, Wellhausen, and others realized the inadequacy of this method of procedure. Hence, they sought and found additional support for their views in what they conceived to have been the political, social, and religious development of the Hebrew people, chiefly through the brilliant exposition of Julius Wellhausen. The newer views rapidly gained adherents in all countries, though there were numerous scholars who insisted that many of the conclusions which found ready acceptance were without adequate support. Now, I'm going to read this. Edward Roos set forth these newer views as early as 1834 in lectures on Old Testament introduction delivered at the University of Strasbourg, but they were not published until 1879 in L'Histoire Sainte et la Loi, and in 1881, Geschichte der Heiligen Schriften des Alten Testaments. Two of Rose's students followed out the suggestions thrown out in the lectures and published their results before the above-mentioned books appeared. K.H. Graf Die. And y'all see that name. I'm not going to go into that. And y'all see all that. Now, the most able of the earlier exponents of the newer method was J. Wellhausen, who set forth his views in various articles and books, notably in Prolegomena zur Geschichte Israel, 1878, and in the fourth edition of Bleek's Anleitung in Alten. And these just sound like, to me, German or Jewish names. I'm just not sure, but that's what it looks or sounds like. Or if this is French or something. French names, maybe. Now, among the followers of these pioneers, two schools may be distinguished. On the one hand, are those who accept Wellhausen's views, not only regarding the growth of Israel's literature, but also regarding the development of Israel's history and religion. On the other hand, there are many scholars who insist that while the newer views regarding the origin of the Old Testament books may be correct, there's much more reliance to be placed upon Hebrew tradition, and that there is more of the unique and divine in Israel's religion than some modern scholars are ready to admit. And again, this is just, I guess these are footnotes. Now, generally speaking, the literary conclusions of Wellhausen School seem to hold the field at present, though not without important modifications. For example, while Wellhausen showed a tendency to assign the origin of a narrative to the period when it was first assumed literary form, it is now quite generally recognized that a narrative may have been in existence long before it was written down, and that it may have been preserved with few alterations by oral tradition for generations and even centuries. As a result, many modern writers' questions of introduction admit the presence in the Old Testament books of much more ancient material than Wellhausen was ready to concede. Now, of the many books reflecting this tendency may be mentioned in addition to those named in the preceding paragraph. And then y'all see what it looks like. English translation 1911. The introductory section of this commentary has been translated into English under the title The Legends of Genesis. Moreover, the discovery of the civilizations and literatures of other Oriental nations has shown, in the first place, the antiquity of literary efforts, and in the second place, the close relation existing between these civilizations and that of Israel, which again points in the direction of greater antiquity for some of the customs and practices recorded in the Old Testament. And what we just read was on what Lex was saying in his Land of Nod video, that the Oriental nations has shown, in the first place, the antiquity of literary efforts, and in the second place, the close relation existing between these civilizations and that of Israel. Now, I'm just letting y'all see what that says. I'm going to stop on page 22. However, while it is undoubtedly true that many recent writers assign some Old Testament material that was formerly considered late to earlier dates, the present trend in pure literary matters is in the direction of the views advocated by the so-called Graf Wellhausen School. All the introductions mentioned in the preceding paragraphs have to do primarily with the origin of the Old Testament books and their component parts, and in all of them, discussions are based upon the books as they appear at present in the Old Testament canon. When it was seen, however, that many of the biblical books are compilations embodying material coming from different periods, attempts came to be made to trace the origin and growth of the Hebrew literary remains, irrespective of the form or forms in which they are found at present. In other words, attempts were made to write histories of the literature of the Hebrews, similar to the histories of the literature of ancient Greece, Rome, India, Persia, and more modern people. Such histories have their place and value in the study of the Old Testament, but they are not introductions, for the latter must begin with the books in their present form and must seek to determine their growth, origin, and setting apart in their present form into the collection of sacred writings known as the Old Testament. So I want to stop right here. This is page 22. I just want to get some more of this reading out, y'all. That's a lot. Hopefully, like I said, this is page 22, but on the bookmark, it's page 25. I'm going to attach a link so that you may read some of this yourself, and if you see something that I should dive into, then I will. Matter of fact, let me just keep going because this is not much. Now, the other branches of Old Testament introduction, the formation of the canon, and the condition and transmission of the text have not been neglected. Most of the introductions already named discuss these subjects at least briefly, but there are some volumes that are devoted entirely to the consideration of one or the other of these two topics. And again, I think these are footnotes. I'm just going to show them on screen. Now, the bearing of recent research and investigation on the permanent place and significance of the Old Testament in religious life and thought has been discussed in a multitude of articles and books. And again, those are footnotes. I'm pausing, letting you see it on the screen, and moving on. Now this is chapter 2. The books of the Pentateuch and their contents. So I'm going to pick up right here. Again, I'm going to add a bookmark. And I'll pick up tomorrow. Peace and blessings, YouTube. Enjoy your day.